Opening statements and testimony from a key witness today in the unprecedented criminal trial against a former president of the United States, Donald Trump. The prosecution's main message that Donald Trump and his allies were involved in a criminal conspiracy and cover-up. CNN's Paula Reed is outside the courthouse. Paula, how did the prosecution and the defense lay out their cases today before the jury?
Well, Jake, we heard dueling interpretations of events roughly 8 years ago. Prosecutors said, look, this is election interference, plain and simple. They allege that these payments to Stormy Daniels were part of a conspiracy to influence the 2016 election. Then they walked through, step by step, how they allege Trump, Cohen, and the then publisher of the National Enquirer, David Pecker, worked to suppress negative stories. And then in the opening statement, they briefly referenced the paper trail that will be at the heart of this case. But when it was time for defense attorneys to get up, they insisted their client is innocent. They said, look, there is no crime here because Trump wasn't involved in this kind of paperwork. He is not involved with things like the 34 documents that constitute each of the counts he is charged with here. Now, they also emphasized that non-disclosure agreements are not illegal. And interestingly, they took aim at Michael Cohen. That's very much expected. They went after his credibility. They suggested that this is someone who is, quote, obsessed with getting Trump. But it was surprising, Jake, that they also went after Stormy Daniels. Now, it's not a guarantee that she will testify in this case because her testimony is not essential to proving the charges that prosecutors have filed here. But it's clear the defense team expects her on the stand, which is part of why they decided to target her in these opening statements. And then the jury heard briefly from the first witness, David Pecker. It was pretty lighthearted testimony, questions about his age, his occupation, even got a few laughs that will continue tomorrow. It's unlikely, though, either side will be laughing for long.
So last week in court, there was what's called a Sandoval hearing, which basically addressing how much Trump can be asked about some of his past criminal cases if he ultimately decides to testify, as he promised he would. So today the judge weighed in on which cases the prosecution could bring up if Trump testifies?
Yeah, there were 4 big issues that the Trump team was trying to prevent prosecutors from being able to ask Trump about if he takes the stand. And they lost on 3 out of the 4. So the judge found that they can ask Trump about the recent civil fraud trial against the Trump Organization, Trump and some of his adult children. Then they also said they can ask about violations of the gag order in that case. They can also ask about the E. Jean Carroll defamation cases, but they cannot ask about a totally separate line of inquiry, lawsuits related to a, quote, frivolous lawsuit that Trump filed against former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. So that can't come in, but the rest of it can. So that's certainly not the way the Trump defense team hoped that would go, and it may give them pause about putting their client on the stand, but I'm not sure, Jake. In talking with my sources, it does appear this is something they're seriously considering, having Trump testify at some point in this trial.
All right, Paula, let's bring in Renato Mariotti, the former federal prosecutor and host of the podcast It's Complicated. Renato, the opening statement by Trump's lawyer essentially argues that Trump was in the White House and had no idea that false business records were being created and he should not be held liable for the actions of others. How do you rate that argument?
I think that's the best argument that Trump's team has available. In other words, the hush money scheme itself is not what Trump is charged with. He's charged with false statements in business records. And I think his best argument is, he wanted to cover this up because it was going to generate bad press, but he had no idea how that was going to be recorded in the books and records of the Trump Organization. Obviously, there are issues with that argument. It's not a perfect argument, but I think that's likely the best argument that they have for an outright victory, and what I think his lawyer is going to be focusing on in the weeks ahead.
Paula, prosecutors' opening statements referred to Trump's actions as a conspiracy multiple times. For example, here's what they said about a 2015 meeting between Trump, David Pecker from National Enquirer, and Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer. They, quote, formed a conspiracy, prosecutors said, at that meeting to influence the presidential election by concealing negative information about Mr. Trump in order to help him get elected, unquote. And we should point out, though, even though they're calling this a conspiracy, Trump's not facing any charges of conspiracy. Why not?
That's right. Well, look, this is a difficult case, and we know that because, of course, the Justice Department passed. It's been around for many years. Many legal experts weren't sure if this could be a case that could be successfully prosecuted. So when you have a case like this, you have to go with what you know you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And here they are charging this as falsifying documents, but they're charging it as a felony, connecting it to federal election campaign interference, even though he's not specifically charged with that. The complexity of this case, the way it's being charged right now, Jake, this is going to be something that the defense will seize on. And it's clear the prosecutors likely would not want to add conspiracy here because it would further complicate the case, likely make it less likely that they would get a guilty verdict.
And that's something we should underscore for our viewers. This is not going to be easy for the prosecution. This is going to be a lift. And Renato, the defense is coming out swinging at two of the prosecution's three biggest witnesses. They're painting Michael Cohen as obsessed with Trump, and they're casting Stormy Daniels as an opportunist. They're suggesting that they never had a sexual encounter, Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump. Do you think that's effective?
I don't think the attack on Stormy Daniels is effective. I actually think that's a mistake on their part. They should actually just say, they can dispute her whether she's truthful or not. But I think trying to attack her is, not where they want to go. There's going to be people in the jury who are sympathetic to her. Unlike Michael Cohen, she's not a criminal. In fact, she's been the victim of crime on behalf of her own attorney committed. I think that the attacks on Cohen, though, are going to be very successful. I mean, he's a convicted liar, convicted fraudster. There's a lot for the defense to work with him. And I think that's why the prosecution is going to be focusing a lot on the documents and the inferences that they are going to argue can be drawn from the documents.
Paula, tomorrow morning there's going to be this hearing about whether Donald Trump has violated his gag order with multiple Truth Social posts that attack witnesses, attack others that he's been told he's not allowed to attack. He is allowed to attack Alvin Bragg, the DA, and the judge. He also claimed with no proof that undercover liberal activists were lying to the judge to get onto the Trump jury. He's not allowed to attack the jury. Do you think the judge is going to go along with prosecutors' claim that Trump violated his gag order? And if he does, do you think he'll fine him? What will he do?
Well, right now, prosecutors are asking for fines for what they allege are at least 7 instances of Trump violating the gag order. They also want him to be put on notice that he could be sanctioned. So, yes, I do expect that the judge is going to weigh in here, will likely issue fines, but will that matter? A fine of what size? Is it really going to make a dent in Trump's bank account? A lot of issues here, but I think the most significant one for the judge to weigh is any impact of statements like that on the jury. Because we know that these people, they're doing their civic duty, but they are taking on a significant risk for themselves and their families. And if we get into a situation where those people continue to feel under increased threat or they are outed online, that is something that if they go through the alternates and start to get to fewer than 12 jurors, that could create a mistrial. So that, I think, is the most serious thing that the judge has to find a way to address and get Trump to stop doing.
Renato, I wanted to ask you, last week when they were going through jury selection, somebody on a conservative channel started put up details about one of the jurors, and everyone did that, put up details that we were allowed to have because the judge is trying to be transparent, but then started to suggest, I don't know about this juror, I don't know about this one. Donald Trump then retruthed it on his social media post. Is that a violation?
I think it is. And just to be clear, what he did, Jake, is he didn't just press the button to retruth or retweet. He actually typed out the words that this host said, Jesse Waters, word for word. And I think because he did that, he retyped them. I think the judge is more likely to find that he adopted those statements and made them his own, even if he put quotation marks around them. I think the judge is going to find that to be a violation. But I agree with Paula. I don't know how much a $1,000 fine is going to do about that. But there's no question in my mind that the judge is going to find that he violated the judge's order.
Renato, before you go, today after court wrapped up, Donald Trump questioned why this case was even brought by the state to begin with and not by the federal court. Take a listen.
If this were such a great case, why didn't the Southern District bring it? Who looked at it, turned it down? Why didn't numerous other agencies and law enforcement groups look at it? Because it was shown to everybody. And very importantly, why didn't the federal elections do anything about it? Because this is federal, it's not state. They're trying to make it a state case.
What's your response to that, Renato?
Well, falsifying business records is a state offense and not a federal offense. And so the bottom line is that there is a state offense here that's very straightforward to prove. Prosecutors felt like they could prove this case, and they didn't feel like the feds didn't feel like they could prove the more broader crime of election fraud.
Paula, are the members of this jury sequestered? Are they in a hotel with no TVs and no internet, or are they allowed to go home, potentially watching or reading the coverage around the case?
Yeah, they are not sequestered at this point. This is something that, of course, has been considered at one point, but it's not something that's being done in this case. The judge has acknowledged the environment of sort of threats and intimidation that they will face, which is why they are largely anonymous, though we can report some details. Given the gravity of the situation, it is unclear if that's something the judge would reconsider, but it's not expected that they will be sequestered. It'll be up to them to stay away from the news. Now, of course, staying away from this story, that means probably no late night comedy shows, no talk shows. I mean, it's going to be hard to stay away from this case. They're going to have to make a concerted effort.